The first book in the Tanakh is the book of Genesis. The word Genesis, a Greek word, literally means the beginning. In the beginning of the first chapter of the first book, which is titled The Beginning, are the words, "In the beginning." Genesis, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was without form or shape, with darkness over the abyss, and a mighty wind sweeping over the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. There is something that goes completely missing in the English and even the Greek Septuagint translation of this verse. The Hebrew text does something with its grammar that the Greek does not that's interesting. Here's the Hebrew. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. I'll overlay the same English translation on top of the Hebrew so you can see what I'm talking about. I've rearranged the Hebrew so that the terms are broken into groups, so we can follow the English from left to right. There's a lonely little Hebrew word that stands all alone, without any direct translational value into either Greek or English. You can completely remove it from the sentence, and it makes no difference to the meaning of the actual words themselves in the first verse in the beginning of the Torah. However, that's not to be misunderstood. It certainly does change the meaning of the sentence as a whole, just as a comma, semicolon, or hyphen might change the meaning of a sentence in English. For example, "Let's eat, Grandma," versus "Let's eat, Grandma." The comma in the first phrase clarifies that we're not here to eat Grandma. The Hebrew word in question is circled above. Et, or the Aleph Tav. The first letter, Aleph, is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, or more appropriately, the Hebrew Aleph Bet. The second letter, Tav, is the last letter of the alphabet. Put them together and you get a word that doesn't change any of the English words that we have in our Bibles, but does render grammatical direction in the original language that the Septuagint was translated from in order to connect the phrase, "God created," and "heavens and the earth." So what is its intended purpose if it has no one-for-one English translational value? Well, the Aleph Tav's presence is littered all over the Tanakh, over 10,000 usages in the Masoretic texts, as well as other Hebrew literary works, and Hebrew scholars, as well as any modern Hebrew speakers, will confirm that this word is known as a direct object pointer. In other words, they will say that this word has no other significance than to highlight the specific object of a verb. In a language that originally had no punctuation markings, this type of pointer is critical in order for the reader to be able to know that the sentence is continuing past the verb and into the next noun. In the case of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the specific object that the Aleph Tav is pointing towards is the heavens. The verb that is doing the actions to the specific object is create. So in order to give the reader the correct sentence structure in the original Hebrew, the Aleph Tav must be placed between the action and the specific object of that action. Otherwise, the reader would assume that the sentence is complete at the end of the phrase, "God created." All things that are done, in other words, all actions to a specific thing, in other words, a specific noun, must be done through the Aleph Tav, for this distinct reason. Without this little two-letter word, et, nothing can be done to another specific thing, grammatically speaking. Let's break down the history of these letters. We'll start with Aleph. Up until now, I've used the modern block sans serif font in this series, which is derived from the Aramaic lettering script that was dominant in the Middle East during the 1st century AD. But this was an adopted script that was much different looking from the original Proto-Sinaitic or Paleo-Hebrew scripts that would have been known to Moses and the early Israelites. We know this from surviving graffiti in the Sinai region inside ancient Egyptian turquoise mining caves that were from the era of the Exodus of the Israelites. Take a look at the Paleo-Hebrew script form of Aleph. The Phoenician version which is derived from the Paleo-Hebrew version, looked like this. If you were to rotate this 90 degrees clockwise, you'll see where the Greek letter alpha comes from, which resembles our modern letter A. What we don't often recognize, though, is that these letters all had ancient meaning. The Greek alpha, like the Phoenician and Hebrew aleph, originally represented the word ox. To understand how this came to be, we must remember that before the Israelites developed their own culture of writing, they were slaves in Egypt. It's no wonder then that the Paleo-Hebrew script, developed from the Proto-Sinaitic script, was derived from Egyptian hieroglyphs. Here are examples of each of those forms of the letter Aleph. The letter Aleph is the father of the Aleph Bet, whose original pictograph represents an ox, strength, and leader. Its numerical value is equal to 1. Aleph in Jewish mysticism represents the oneness of God. Now let's take a look at the letter Tav, which had an ancient meaning, mark. We'll clearly be able to understand why in a moment. Take a look at the Paleo-Hebrew script form. And here is the Phoenician script form. And finally, the Proto-Sinaitic script and Egyptian hieroglyphic original. Throughout history, those who cannot read or write often leave their mark, which is drawn as the letter Tav, in its Phoenician or hieroglyph form. In fact, this has been done for a couple thousand years in this way. When we sign a document or contract, we leave our mark, or our Tav, signifying that we have entered into an unbreakable covenant. Our mark or sign is our vow that we will abide by an agreement, which is our word. As long as our word is good, our mark has meaning and value in a covenantal relationship. In its earliest form, the Aleph Tav would have been seen as one of the following, both of which had the same meaning of the Father's mark or God's sign. Looking back at the first verse in Genesis, we see that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth through the Aleph Tav. Through this little word et, all things came to be. Without it, nothing can be said to have been made. In the Hebrew language, nothing could be done without this word. So another way to read the first verse in Genesis is, in the beginning, God created, through his mark, the heavens and the earth. So what is God's mark? What does his signature look like? Well, let's take a look at the Proto-Sinaitic script version of Tav and know that the meaning of this letter is mark, and that this mark is God's sign or signature. If God were to have to complete a legal agreement in writing, this is what he would write at the bottom of that contract, or a covenant to use the language consistent with our biblical texts, as an indication that he accepts the terms and conditions of that covenant. If this visual is starting to look a little bit too much like modern Western Christianity reading into ancient Eastern Hebrew thought, then let's try to get a little bit closer to an ancient Eastern thinker's mind. We have two documents written by an early disciple of Christ who was not a Western thinker, but who was rather a Jew himself, interpreting his own Jewish texts through his own understanding of what that text meant to his own people at the time that he wrote down his thoughts of what this word Aleph Tav meant. Take a look at how the beginning of the first chapter of the Gospel according to John opens up. John chapter 1 verses 1 through 4. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came to be through him, and without him nothing came to be. What came to be through him was life, and this life was the light of the human race. Verse 3 is the key to understanding what in Greek John means where the word logos is present in our surviving Greek manuscripts of his gospel. This entire opening volley that John writes is a throwback to how the book of Genesis opens up. And verse 3 is a clear reference to the Hebrew word that all things are done through, which is the Aleph Tav, or what we can read as the sign of God's covenant. John is pointing out that this sign is Yeshua, and his mark is that of the cross, the original Proto-Sinaitic version of the letter Tav. If you need further evidence that this is what John was thinking, he reinforces this very directly when in the book of Revelation he writes this. Revelation chapter 22 verse 13. I, Yeshua, am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Now, biblical scholars are split on two things with regard to Revelation. The first is the idea that it was written by the same author as the Gospel according to John. The second is that it was written in Aramaic and not in Greek, which is a language we translate from today, to get to the passage in English above. It's an important thing to understand that regardless of the answer to the first debate of authorship, what is clear to all scholars is that the author was clearly Jewish, not Greek. The literary similarities between Revelation and the books of Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Daniel make this book so Jewish that to think that the author would have written in Greek rather than Hebrew or the Hebrew cousin Aramaic would be a huge leap in logic I'm not able to take. As a Jew, John's education would have been in Hebrew, just like every other Jew in Galilee where he grew up. His basic education would have been the Torah. He would have been expected to learn the alphabet backwards and forwards. He would not, however, have been taught to read and write in Greek. His Hebrew background would have shaped his thoughts and any literary references he would have come up with. Now, would Revelation have been translated into Greek for the churches in Asia to be able to read it? Of course, they were Greek. That's what they would have read and preserved over the ages. If you imagine the same verse above from Revelation in Hebrew or even Aramaic, I am the Alpha and the Omega would instead become I am the Aleph and the Tav. Alpha and Omega were the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, and we already know that the Aleph and the Tav were the first and last letters of the Hebrew and Aramaic alphabets. So it's easy to see where the Greek translations would have been derived. Put more plainly, John is recording Yeshua, who would also not be speaking Greek to a fellow Jew, saying that he is God's sign, which is his covenant that existed in the beginning and will last until the end of time. And through the covenantal sign of the cross, all things can be done. This is why we say in the Nicene Creed, I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God. Begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father, through him all things were made. Okay, Yeshua on the cross is God's signature. So what? Well, as mentioned above, signatures are important in a covenantal relationship. When you make an agreement with someone, that signature is pretty necessary if your contract's going to hold up in a court of law. But God doesn't have any contract in place, so why does he require a signature? Well, actually God does have a covenantal contract. It's actually a blood covenant that he entered in with Abram before he was named Abraham. We can see this when we read Genesis chapter 15. Genesis chapter 15 verses 1 through 20. Sometime afterward, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not fear, Abram. I am your shield. I will make your reward very great. But Abram said, Lord God, what can you give me if I die childless and have only a servant of my household, Eliezer of Damascus? Abram continued, Look, you have given me no offspring, so a servant of my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, No, that will not be your heir. Your own offspring will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars if you can. Just so, he added, will your descendants be. Abram put his faith in the Lord, who attributed it to him as an act of righteousness. He then said to him, I am the Lord who brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as a possession. Lord God, he asked, how will I know I will possess it? He answered him, bring ye a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. He brought him all these, split them in two, and placed each half opposite of the other. But the birds he did not cut up. Birds of prey swooped down on the carcasses, but Abram scared them away. As the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and a great dark dread descended upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will reside as aliens in a land not their own, where they shall be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation they must serve, and after this they will go out with great wealth. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace. You will be buried at a ripe old age. In the 4th generation your descendants will return here, for the wickedness of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had set and it was dark, there appeared a smoking firepot and a flaming torch, which passed between those pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of the Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. This chapter is often skipped over or breezed through by the modern Western reader. This is a very critical beginning to a long-term, legally binding relationship between God and his people, namely the people of Abraham. At its basic core, this chapter in Genesis does 3 things. It shows that God has a promise to deliver offspring to Abram, and then land, and then blessings to those descendants. Then it shows Abram questioning God about how he is to know that God will keep his promise to him. Finally, it outlines a very special ritual that God and Abram set up, which establishes a blood covenant between the two of them, which shows how serious God is about his promise. The ritual that God and Abram set up is a ritual normally associated in the ancient world with important agreements, such as marriage betrothals or land-related contracts. You'll notice it involves a lot of killing of animals and splitting of large animals into 2 halves. The Bible narratives does not describe this in much detail to understand enough about how this was really done or why it was done. It assumes the reader already understands the ritual because of its commonness in the time it was written. To the ancient people of the East, it would have been unnecessary to provide that extra detail or explanation, as this was part of a common culture as much as it is commonplace for us to set up things like mortgage contracts with our banks today. I don't have to tell you in great detail what is written on the 200 pages that I signed when my wife and I bought our house. They all say in about 200 different ways that if we fail to pay our monthly payments, the bank is going to take our house from us. And I also don't have to describe this to anyone in our modern culture, just like the biblical authors didn't feel the need to go into great detail what all those dead animals and their blood meant to those entering into any type of blood covenant. To those of us living in a totally different culture, far removed from ancient times, I do have to explain the significance of the ritual that God and Abram set in place. The first thing Abram would have done is he would have dug a trench. The trench serves as both a place to collect the blood spilled through the act of cutting the animals in half, and a walkway for those entering into the covenant to walk through later on. Now, normally, both participants in the contract signing would take their turns walking through the blood trench. stomping as they walked so that the blood of the animals would visibly be present on their garments. The meaning behind this was to effectively say, "May this be done to me if I do not keep my oath." Or in other words, what has been done to these animals shall be done to me if I do not honor the agreement. Both parties to the agreement must make their way down the blood trench in order for the covenant to be complete. Otherwise, there's no implied penalty for the party who fails to make the blood trench walk. You'll notice, though, in the underlined verse above, see verse 17, that only God walks the blood pathway. In fact, God is taking responsibility for all the penalties, regardless which party violates the agreement. This is the one thing that would have been very noticeably different to the ancient Eastern reader from what would be considered standard procedure. Abram just stands there on the sideline, even though he's a named party within the covenant, and he watches as God takes on all of the risk of the penalty, which, by the way, is death. What is really going on here takes us all the way through the book of Exodus to explain. I'll show you how what God really is doing with Abram is entering into a betrothal agreement with Abram. He promises descendants to Abram for this very purpose. God wants a bride. He chooses to have Abram be the father of the bride. So he enters into this unbreakable contract with Abram so that his marriage can be arranged. In ancient Eastern culture, marriage has two major events. The betrothal ceremony, which was between the father of the bridegroom and the father of the bride, was the first step that needed to take place. For the father of the bride, he was committing to the other man that he would supply a virgin of certain childbearing age, along with other specific requirements such as land, livestock, or other committed resources, a dowry of sorts. For the father of the bridegroom, he was committing to take the bride into his household and take care of her for life, and any other provisions mandated by the agreement. After the ceremony was completed, the bridegroom and bride were considered married. But the consummation of marriage would happen at a later time, sometimes even much later. The father of the bridegroom would instruct his son to build a place that would be suitable for him and his new bride to live. The father of the bridegroom would oversee that son's construction of this place within the father's household, in other words, within his land. While this project was taking place, the bride would stay within her own father's household until the bridegroom showed up to take her to his home that he had built under his father's supervision. This is the point in time when the bridegroom enters the father of the bride's household to collect his bride and take her to his own father's household, that the marriage festivities occur. This is the point in time when everyone in the bride's hometown would come together in wedding garments and throw a huge party, and the marriage would officially be consummated by the bridegroom and his bride. And again, this consummation is validated with blood. That is, if it is really a virgin that was given in marriage. The father of the bridegroom was the one who would determine when his son had adequately prepared a suitable place for the newlyweds to live. Only the father of the bridegroom would truly know when his son was ready to return and collect his bride and kick off their new life together. If he wasn't happy with what his son was preparing, he'd delay the son's return to the father of the bride's household. Only the father of the bridegroom truly knows when his son will return to collect his bride. Notice in verse 13 through 15 how the children of Abram would have to wait in a different land while God, the father of the bridegroom, was preparing the land for them. When the right time would come and everything was prepared properly for the bride, the Israelites, the bridegroom would come and collect his bride from the Egyptian Pharaoh, and the marriage celebration would commence. The bridegroom does finally come and rescue his bride after hundreds of years of preparation. And under the chuppah, or wedding canopy, the couple consummated their marriage. The canopy is the tent, or even just a blanket, that covers the couple as they become one flesh and make their marriage official. Oh, you don't remember when this occurred? Well, think back to the exodus of the Israelites to Mount Sinai. God instructed Moses to set up camp at the foot of the mountain. When Moses was invited up to the mountaintop to receive his instructions for how his people were to live, i.e. the commandments. This is just the same as a bridegroom giving his bride the rules of his father's household before they enter into their arrangement. The Israelites, as the bride, performed their own blood ritual when they received the new set of commands given to Moses by the bridegroom, i.e. God. This committed them to the same type of blood obligation via a new covenant, the Mosaic covenant. They essentially were taking their own oath under penalty of death that they would follow the rules of the bridegroom's father's household for the rest of their lives. Let's go to Exodus chapter 24, verses 1 through 8. Moses himself was told, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, and Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. You shall bow down at a distance. Moses alone is to come close to the Lord. The others shall not come close, and the peoples shall not come up with them." When Moses came to the people and related all the words and ordinances of the Lord, they all answered with one voice, "We will do everything the Lord has told us." Moses then wrote down all of the words of the Lord, and rising early in the morning, he built at the foot of the mountain an altar and 12 sacred stones for the 12 tribes of Israel. Then, having sent young men of the Israelites to offer burnt offerings and sacrifice young bulls as communion offerings to the Lord, Moses took half of the blood and put it in large bowls. The other half he splashed on the altar. Taking the book of the covenant, he read it aloud to the people, who answered, "All that the Lord has said, we will hear and do." Then he took the blood and splashed it on the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you according to all these words." The Israelites, after taking this oath and entering into this marriage covenant, had their entire encampment covered with a giant chuppah. God covered the entire encampment underneath the canopy of clouds. And this is when the marriage was consummated. And then, almost immediately, the Israelites totally start to disregard their blood covenant oaths that they just took, and they play the harlot with other gods within the region, completely forsaking their wedding vows at Sinai. And they do pay for it with death, both physical and spiritual death. And the Israelites keep getting themselves in this endless cycle of turning away from God and forsaking Him. That is literally the only single thing that links all the books within the Tanakh. It was the children of Abram that ended up causing a violation of the betrothal contract that God had made with Abraham himself. But here's the problem. Who should pay the price of death that was the consequence for this broken betrothal blood covenant? Well, since Abraham didn't walk the blood pathway, it cannot be he who pays the price of breaking the covenant. God walked the pathway by himself. Abraham was just there as a witness. Therefore, since death was required, God would have to bear the penalty himself. No action can be done to a thing except through the Aleph Tav, God's mark. You cannot even give your life or fulfill a covenant except through this two-lettered word. The Hebrew language has no other way of reconciling a verb and a noun except through it. So, God fulfilled his obligation to the blood covenant by affixing his signature, his mark, his cross, which signifies that his death will restore his promise for all the nations to be blessed through the descendants of Abraham. That we all shall have a place being prepared for us within the father of the bridegroom's household, the promised land of eternal paradise. May the peace of Christ be with us all, my brothers and sisters, until we meet again.